In interviewing and in hiring, we can't ignore our intuition, but we also don't want to just blindly rely on our instincts. We need both. We need our intuition and we also need additional information. And we need this in the hiring process to ultimately help you make better hires. And that's what I want to talk about today, the importance of heeding your intuition in the hiring process to help you figure out what additional information you need and then how to go about getting that additional information to ultimately help you make lasting hires. That's what we want. A good hire is a lasting hire. And I'll share some case study examples, and I also will share a proven framework that is going to help you ultimately make better hires. And it's not necessarily easy, but it is very simple. And the more you are, well, first by becoming aware of this very simple process that I'm going to give you, so definitely stick around for it. The more aware you are of it, the more likely you will be to practice it. And then of course, the more you practice it, the better you will get at it. And also added bonus, you can take and apply this process to anywhere in life, not just in the hiring process to help you make better hires, but any area in your life, and it will help you go further faster, will help you achieve your goals faster. So stick around, I promise. It's a super simple process and you can definitely do it and it will definitely help. All right, so first I want to talk a little bit more about intuition and heeding your intuition in the interview process and what I mean by this. So first I'll give a few personal examples and then we'll get a little bit deeper into the topic and then we'll get into the case studies and then we'll get into the process. All right, so what happens for me? Well, first I'll just share how I typically start a conversation with candidates. I've been recruiting for over a decade now, so I have of course a lot of experience working with leaders and also working with candidates. And I like to be able to envision the candidate in their atmosphere. I think that's just a personal thing that I like to do. I like to create stories. I like to see the full picture. I'm not so good with gray areas. I like to develop deeper understandings. A deeper understanding when I'm talking with someone. And so with candidates, I want to understand their day-to-day. And so I will typically open the call, what are you up to today? I want to know what they're doing right then. And I can gather a lot from this information. Maybe they are driving in between appointments. Maybe they are in between calls parked outside of their next office. Maybe they're not working right now and they just got back from the gym and they're hopping on the computer to actively start searching for their next role. And by asking this question early on, my first question, I can learn three things. I can learn a little bit more about their day-to-day, I can learn how well they prioritize their time, and I can learn about their work ethic. And now I want to share some examples of a few potential red flag situations when after asking this question, so within 5 seconds of the conversation, already I'm identifying a red flag and trying to figure out, I'm paying attention to that uncomfortable emotion and letting it guide me toward my next direction. And that's what you want to do in the interview process. We don't want to ignore our intuition and we don't want to solely rely on it blindly and, okay, let me get off the phone right now, let me pass on this candidate right now because of this potential concern that I have. But we don't want to ignore it. We want to use it to figure out, to recognize, you know what, I need more information. I have a hesitation. So for example, one candidate, it was 12 o'clock in the afternoon for our scheduled call. First time speaking with this candidate, I had sent him an email with some general information about the opportunity. And in my initial outgoing email to candidates, it should be enough information for them to glance and assess, yes, this interests me. Of course, they need more information before they prioritize investing more of their time. But, investing 30 minutes to learn more, or at least a few minutes. If we learn in the first few minutes of the conversation that it's not a fit, well then, of course, we can take our time back and end the conversation. And now I know what to keep that candidate in mind for moving forward. Anyhow, 12 o'clock, how are you? What are you up to today? Well, I was in the field calling on accounts and I just arrived home for our call. Red flag warning signal is already going off for me because this is your initial conversation with a recruiter. It's not necessary for you to be at home. It's not a Zoom conversation. It's not an interview with the hiring manager where you need to be completely free of distractions. I mean, we don't want to have a lot of distractions, but he could have just sat parked in front of his next account. So red flag is going off for me. So I'm not going to just jump at my instinct there and end the conversation right then, but I'm noting this is a concern. The concern is, how does he prioritize his time? Why is it so important for him to leave his his current role, territory for his current role, to come back and take this call. So I did end up ending the conversation within 5 minutes, because I let that information and my instinct, how I felt about it, guide me to ask additional questions to help me better assess if I wanted to invest more time with this candidate. And I quickly learned that I did not. Another time, a candidate, same question, how are you? What are you up to so far today? And this candidate was in between roles, and he was watching this, I quote, he said, watching the construction outside the window. So I understand that you don't have a job to do right now, but watching enough said there. I knew that this candidate was not going to be a fit. I did engage for probably 15 or 20 more minutes, which was not the best use of my time, but I was trying to see if I could pull what I needed out of this candidate, if he could potentially overcome that concern, and he did not. Other times, candidates might be not answering the question that I'm asking. I might be rephrasing it multiple times and still not getting the information that I need. And I'm noting that this is a potential concern. But in this case, it could be me. Maybe I'm not asking my question clearly enough. So I'm paying attention to this hesitation. I'm not acting on it blindly and ending the conversation. And maybe I've tried to rephrase my question multiple times, and I'm at the point where, looking at the candidate's background and experience, they may be a fit. And so I still don't want to discount them. And I also don't want to keep pushing and make the conversation uncomfortable. So instead, what I'm going to do is make a mental note or a physical note, because I'm always taking notes, of course, when I'm interviewing candidates, to come back to this question or this topic, because I need more information here. But maybe I'm going to pivot and share a little bit of detail out on the role to take some pressure off the candidate. Maybe I'm going to ask if they have any questions or something like that, to just kind of pivot for a little bit, but I am going to circle back to that question. I'm not going to ignore it, because if I do, chances are very likely this potential concern is going to show up later in the interview process. Now, if I were to instead ignore my instinct and just continue sharing about the role and asking all of the questions that I need to know, and had a 30 to 40 minute conversation with the candidate, depending on the level of the role, knowing deep down that they're not a fit when my intuition is telling me there's a concern here, then I've just wasted 30 to 40 minutes of my time. And as a recruiter, if I'm not prioritizing my time well, then I'm wasting my client's time, the hiring manager. And then I'm also going to feel frustrated after I get off the phone, because I know that I didn't invest my time well. And the same can happen for you as a leader. When you stick with an interview when you know that the candidate is not a fit, you know that you're not using your time well, and your team needs you, and you have other priorities. So then we can be later working with a distracted focus, and that 30 to 60 minute interview block ends up costing us a lot more in our time, because when we're working with a distracted focus, it is slowing us down. Now let's talk about what that feeling might feel like for you as a leader when you're going through the interview process. I mean, it sounds obvious, like we should be able to identify our feelings, but this is actually something that a lot of us don't do. I definitely teach this as a foundational concept in my one-on-one coaching and in my workshops. You want to feel and identify your emotions, because they're going to help guide your direction. And this practice also is going to create greater self and then social awareness, because the more aware we are of ourselves and our feelings, the better we can identify what's going on with others. And this is naturally going to help you become a better leader the more you elevate your self and social awareness, and definitely help you be more tuned in to make the right hire to candidates, and whether or not they're the right hire, and then making lasting hires. So for me, I would say that I'm pretty unique. I'm very sensitive and an empath. I know there are lots of empaths out there. So how I use this how this serves me rather in the interview process, because it can be quite challenging to navigate. So as an empath, if you're not familiar, I not only pick up on, but I absorb other people's emotions. And so if I'm talking with somebody, with a candidate in the interview process, and they're being very standoffish, and I can tell that they're hiding something, this is a red flag for me. And not only is it an uncomfortable feeling, what happens for me is my body starts going into fight or flight mode. I can feel it on the inside. My heart will start racing. I'll start sweating. not profusely or anything, but I'm noticing these signals. Now the candidate doesn't necessarily know. We're on the phone and I'm contained, but I'm feeling all of this inside. So this is cueing me to get out of get out of there, get out of this conversation. So it may not feel that strong for you. For me, it's very strong, and so it lets me know very quickly what I need to do. But what might it feel like for you if you are maybe more on the normal side of feeling your feelings? It might feel like resistance. It might feel like confusion. You might feel like, okay, this candidate, maybe you haven't thought it all the way through in your mind, because we have our feelings, our intuition, and then logic, our reasoning process takes a moment. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment, how you can tell if it is your intuition or if it's logic. So we feel our instincts before we've had a chance to process it. So you may not have fully, it might take you a minute or 10 seconds even to think, okay, this candidate, I don't think they're a fit. But first you're going to feel confused. Why is this candidate on my calendar? And then, I don't think that they're a fit. So you might feel confusion. You might feel resistance. That hesitation often feels like a resistance. So anytime you're feeling maybe like a tightness, a resistance, or confusion, this is a sign from your intuition that you need more information. And it's as simple as that. You don't have to make any decision from there except for to acknowledge the feeling and let that guide your next direction. But I do want to quickly bring attention to this point right here, which is often when I'm speaking with a hiring manager who made a bad hire, and we're going to call a bad hire a year and a half or less. Definitely a year or less. Sometimes it's 6 months, but it's unlikely that you get a bad hire out of I shouldn't say it's unlikely. It typically takes time to get a bad hire exited out of the organization. So usually it's around a year or so. But the manager, I'll always ask them, were there any signs that showed up in the interview process that gave you pause? And they always say yes, and it always turns out that the pause that they had is the reason they turned out to be a bad hire. So think how much time and money and energy and stress you can save yourself as a leader, you yourself and your team and your organization, by recognizing when your instincts are trying to tell you something. And we don't have to necessarily, again, let our instincts be our first and final decision. We just want to use it to let us figure out the information that we need to acknowledge, one, we need more information, and then how do we get there? And this is something that Herbert Simon calls bounded rationality. So if you're not familiar with Herbert Simon, he has done many things. He has many titles, but notably he won the Nobel Prize for his work in decision making, Nobel Prize in economics for his work in decision making. And so he coined the term bounded rationality. And so what this means is, we're always going to have our instinct, our intuition, but we don't want to jump and make our decision just with that. We need more information. But if we try and get more and more and more and more and more and all the information, which is not possible, there's always going to be additional information and details to get. So there's no such thing as perfect information. So there comes a point where we want to balance, and this is called bounded rationality, because if we go too far and try and gathering information, well then probably the goal or the challenge will have changed, and then by that point the information is irrelevant. Now let's look at some case study examples. So the first one, ignoring instinct. So this was a candidate of mine, and sometimes we present candidates that check some of the boxes and not all. Maybe we do have a hesitation. Maybe sometimes I have a hesitation with the candidate, and I'll go ahead and present them, but I'm going to be open and upfront about, here's the boxes that we check, here's where I have some pause, to let the manager know this is what we want to dig deeper on. There's an interview process, of course, for a reason. Well, this candidate was very excited, showed up with a lot of excitability about the company and the role. But my hesitation was he wasn't able to articulate why he was excited. And for some reason, the regional director and even the VP of sales were really high on this candidate. So they were not picking up on what I was picking up on. My challenge is that I don't think that he's presenting genuinely and authentically. He might really want this job, but why? If we don't have a solid why guiding our what, then it's probably not going to be a long-term fit. So I was I was recruiting for this company. I was not consulting for them, although I do share my hesitations in the process. But as a recruiter, I'm not the decision maker. The hiring manager, of course, is the decision maker. So if it were me, how I would address or how I would advise addressing this potential red flag concern would be to give the candidate an additional assignment. So create another interview step in the process. And the candidate doesn't necessarily need to know that this is an additional interview step just for him. It's not typically part of the process, although I think it's a great step to always be part of the process. But have him put together a why me presentation. Okay, candidate, for your next step in the interview process, or maybe it's the final step in the interview process, we would like for you to put together a 15-minute why me presentation. Why you for this role in this organization, and why this organization and this role for you. And present in front of a panel. I guarantee that candidate would not have been able to do it, and then yes, it probably would have disappointed the hiring manager and the VP, so it may hurt in this sense to use our instincts, because then our star candidate is going to fall out of the process, and then we're going to have to start over again. But instead they went ahead and hired this candidate, and 6 months later he was no longer with the organization. So we'll leave it at that. But think about how much time, effort, energy, stress, and money this bad hire costs the organization. And that one simple step, while yes, it would take some additional time, maybe another week, maybe even 2 weeks to get everybody's schedules coordinated, it would take so much less time. Taking that time on the front end can later save you time on the back end. So that's an example of ignoring instincts. And so now a case study where the hiring manager or leadership team acted on their instincts. So this was, again, my candidate, and she was a super strong candidate. She had presented very well throughout the interview process, and so she was in the final interview, which was a panel interview, and the CEO of the company, this was a med device company, happened to be in that interview. And something in the way that she was presenting, some behavior that she was doing in that interview gave him pause. So this was his instinct giving him a concern. And so what he did was he acted on it right then by giving this candidate some coaching feedback. And what did this strong candidate do? She took the feedback, she received it well, and then she implemented, course corrected right there in the interview. And this was very impressive for the leadership team and the CEO. And this candidate, by giving this candidate some coaching feedback, another way of saying he identified and addressed and acted on his red flag concern, he gave the candidate an opportunity to try and overcome that concern, and she was able to. She was hired and she stayed with the company for a long time. She might still be there, I'll have to check. And she was promoted as was the goal with the course of that particular role. Final case study example, this was a VP who, so second line leader, leading leaders, and she had a hesitation with this candidate, but the other members of the leadership team that were participating in the process felt this candidate was a strong candidate. They felt confident that the candidate could do the job. But just because a candidate can do the job doesn't necessarily mean they're the right candidate for the role, for the company culture, for the organization, for the team. And it turned out that they were not a fit. And then by this time, the damage was done. The VP was working so many extra hours a week to try to rebuild the team, to try to uplift morale, to try to rehire. And so by ignoring this instinct, and by ignoring, I mean to say she didn't act on her instinct, by acknowledging it and then taking an action step. Instead, and there can be pressure, I get it, to hire quickly. It can be challenging to stand up and have the unpopular opinion in lots of scenarios. Trust me, I'm typically the one who I will always stand up and say something, and sometimes it wins me friends, lots of times it doesn't. But I'm going to honor my intuition and speak up, because I think that that's the best way to help others. And I'm not going to go against myself when I know that something doesn't feel right. Again, we don't have to pass on the candidate right away, but we need more information. And so by ignoring her instinct in this situation, she ended up having a lot of extra work, a lot of extra stress, costing the company extra revenue because her team wasn't making their sales numbers. On top of all of that, she had to start the recruiting, interviewing, and hiring process all over again. And that cost organizations a tremendous amount of time and money as well. So what is the takeaway? Don't fear your instincts. Don't ignore your intuition. Again, we don't have to rely on it blindly, but use it to guide your next step. Maybe it's an additional step in the interview process. Maybe it's giving the candidate some coaching feedback. Maybe it's giving the candidate an additional assignment. But you don't want to ignore your intuition. Sometimes, yes, it may hurt because it might mean letting go of your star candidate and then having to start the process over again, which can be, of course, very stressful. But other times it can elevate your confidence in a candidate, and then that can make you feel really confident in that you're making the right hire, which is going to be a lasting hire. Okay, thank you for sticking around until now. It's time to get to the framework that I promised you. Pause, question, validate. And I've got two ways that I like to share this, but first I'll share this one. So what do I mean by pause? Pay attention to your emotion. When you feel that uncomfortable emotion, that question, that pause, that resistance, if you're me, that fight or flight some of the time. We don't want to just ignore that and keep moving forward. And we don't want to necessarily, we don't have to just let go of the situation, the candidate right then, but we want to feel the feeling enough to let us pause. Aha, I need more information. And then question. So pause, identify the feeling, really feel it, and then question. What is it that I need here? What additional information, or how can I get this? First, what additional information do I need to help me overcome this red flag, or to give the candidate an opportunity to see if they can overcome this hesitation for me? What question do I need to ask? Is it another interview step? Do I need to pull somebody else in the process? What is it that I need to find out? And then how can I go about getting that information? And then after you do that, then you can validate your concern or elevate your confidence in moving the candidate forward. So that's one way that I can phrase the framework. My favorite way to talk about it is fear versus intuition. And this is such a great teaching tool and concept that you can take and apply in the hiring process and anywhere else in your life. And it will, I guarantee, you will move further faster. You will achieve your goals faster, whether it's in the hiring process or another area. I also guarantee you are already employing this practice in the areas in your life, personal or professional, where you feel happy, where you feel successful, where you feel aligned. You feel good in the areas that you're doing this. And I had this epiphany light bulb go off years ago when I stopped to think, because I've been practicing self-reflection and introspection for decades now, and this is such a gift, this practice that it's not an easy one, but I had no choice. I had some unfortunate situations in my younger years that led to unhappy feelings, and so I was on a constant quest to figure out what was going on inside of me. So I didn't really understand what I was doing at the time, but I was employing this practice. And I was also working to do things in my professional career and in my life, adopting healthy habits that made me feel better, because I wasn't feeling good and I needed something to feel good. So for example, I started writing to better understand myself, to express, because that made me feel good. I started working out at a young age. That made me feel good. I developed a strong work ethic and worked really hard and achieved success in my career. That made me feel good, but I still wasn't feeling good in some areas. So anyway, the epiphany light bulb moment that went off years later, after employing this practice in the areas where I felt good in my life, I thought, okay, so over here, you're not doing so great. You don't like how you feel. Over here, we're doing pretty great. So what are you doing over here that's working for you? Oh, here's what you're doing. You're making your decisions not based on fear. You are leading with your intuition, not blindly my intuition, but my intuition, I'm feeling it to help guide my direction. For example, college student or professional going through the interview process. If we feel uncomfortable in a certain environment for our work and we continue going in that direction, we're not going to be very happy in our career. In the interview process, as a candidate, if you continue moving forward in a process where you don't like how you're feeling, how you feel around the team is not resonating with you, that's not the role for you. But if you keep moving forward out of fear, what if something else doesn't come along? What if I don't get something better? I better take this opportunity. Well, you have now created your future, and you're not going to be free to receive and to recognize that opportunity. Okay, so then what I did was, once I realized, okay, this is what's working for me here, let me take and apply this process in the area of my life where I'm not feeling good for decades, and feel tremendously better now, much happier in all areas of my life, simply by adopting this process. And I was already doing it. I just wasn't doing it in the area where I had some fear, right? So let's break it down super simple, very literal. By definition, fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief of something that might happen. Emotion, belief, logic, okay? And we don't even know if it's going to happen, but we've got an uncomfortable feeling that took logic to get there because it took some thinking. It's based on a belief of what might or might not happen. That's the definition of fear. So an unpleasant emotion based on the belief that something might cause danger, okay? And then by definition, intuition is the immediate understanding without the need for reasoning. Immediate understanding without the need for logical reasoning. So by definition, your intuition always comes first because it's immediate, it's instant understanding without the need for conscious reasoning. And so that's how you can identify whether it is fear or intuition talking. And yes, sometimes the fear emotion will come first, but that is only when you are in danger. This is why we have our instincts innately to keep us safe and protected, to keep us alive. So if you are in the way of a moving car and you need to get out of the moving car, you don't have time to sit and logically process what's going on. It's not rational, it's not logical. You have the right of way. Your instincts are going to kick yourself into high gear so that you get out of the way to keep you safe and alive. Most of the time, we're not in any real danger, especially in the hiring process. Yes, it can hurt a lot if we make a bad hire, so there's fear there, but pause and question, okay, acknowledge the emotion, and then which came first, the fear or the intuition? Your intuition, I'm not sure that this is the right candidate, and then the fear. But everybody else thinks that they're a strong candidate. Well, I really need to hire, we need to hire in time for a product launch. This is all fear. So if you acknowledge the emotion and then figure out which came first, and then you can choose to focus back on your instinct and then let that guide your direction. So that is a very simple formula that I promise will help you make more lasting hires, make more of the right hires with confidence and with less stress. And again, please take and apply that process in all other areas in your life, those areas where you're operating on fear, and you're going to see some changes quickly. Now, here's the thing. Leadership teams need coaching. They need support. It is unrealistic when you think about how busy leaders are with all of the different things that they're focusing on when they're hiring to then take and apply a repeatable framework like the attract, select, and retain model that I talk about, and like learning to employ their instincts and then practice next steps and have those communication standards in place without ongoing coaching and support. And this is where I come in. My name is Amy Miller, and I help leadership teams make lasting hires with less stress. And if this is something that you would like to learn more about, please reach out. I would love to connect. My contact is in the description, along with links to learn more about my coaching and my workshops. If you got some value from this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.